How's it going, guys? On this week's episode, I want to talk about something that I've wanted to touch on and hinted that I would for quite a while now, and that is arrow diagnosis. Basically, being able to look at what your arrow has done on the target and figure out what's going on with your shot. And with season probably about to start for a lot of you, for me it's less than a month away, there's still time to figure out what you're doing with your shot, to clean up some stuff, to make yourself more accurate, more consistent, and be able to get the most amount of energy and efficiency that you possibly can out of these traditional bows to go chase after big game. So hang with me and let's jump right into the video. So the best way that I know how to do this is to work clockwise with the arrow and kind of break down individually with each position of the arrow, each arrow impact, to help you figure out what might be going on with your shot. Now, granted, this doesn't always mean anything. This isn't a 110% effective way of diagnosing what happened. As you get more experienced, you'll be able to kind of more so figure out what's going on, if that makes any sense. But this gets you really close and it gives you an idea. It gives you somewhere to start. So again, we're gonna work clockwise and I'm gonna try to keep this as brief and informative as possible for you. So let's start with a high impact. Let's say you're aiming right here and you hit right there. What's wrong? So a couple things it could be. More than likely, it's just where you were holding. That's all that there is to it. And for me, 9 times out of 10, a high impact like this is because, you know, let's say if you're using a gap system, I would normally hold, let's say down around here somewhere to impact right here. A high impact probably just means that maybe at the last second, you know, whenever your arrow was drifting around while you're at full draw, you know, you just drifted up a little bit too far whenever you broke that shot, and so instead of impacting here, it hit high. A lot of times that's all that it is, as far as I've ever been able to tell, and nothing a whole lot to prove that otherwise. The second thing that I guess it could be is that you are jumping your arrow at the last second, or you're not following through, which tends to be the cause of a lot of problems, is that I've noticed, even for me, is follow through. So at the last second, whenever you were going to shoot, you jumped to the bow up like that. You did a little motion like that. And whether you're reacting to the shot or something like that, having some built-up anticipation, could be something like that. So something to pay attention to. Follow-up could cause a high impact. So to fix that, just make sure that you're being consistent. If you're normally, you know, let's say right in here whenever you release the arrow, and you are someone that pays attention to the tip of your arrow, which new archers, I would suggest that you do that. Make sure that you're right around in here somewhere when you release that arrow. So if you're okay with this much drift in your arrow, expect that you're gonna hit within a couple inches of anywhere of that spot. Keep that kind of stuff in mind. And for the follow through problem, just drill it into your head. Make sure whenever you release that arrow to the time it impacts, that bow hand does not move. You don't jump it up, you don't drop it, you don't move it any direction. You keep that bow in its position until that arrow impacts the target. Now, let's move to a right impact for a right-handed shooter. Note, any of these, you know, right, left impact things that I discuss, it's the exact opposite if you're left-handed. So just keep that in mind. A right impact. A right impact can be more so of an arrow issue or of a tune issue. Simply, a right impact might just be again, that's where your arrow was when you released the arrow. So the importance of having a strong shot, a strong holding position to make sure you're alleviating all that arrow movement. That's going to be a lot of it. And if you're shooting too heavy of a bow, it makes it that much harder to hold that arrow as still, or that bow as still as possible for the shot. But outside of just simple arrow movement causing a right impact, it could be that you're shooting too weak of an arrow. So a knock left means that as that arrow is bending around the bow, your arrow is so weak that it's bending around that bow and it can't recover. It's just bending around the bow, zoop, and flying down range like this. So as that arrow is bending around your bow and it's too weak to recover itself, as if it's flying down range like this, you're gonna have a right impact as a right-handed shooter, like that. Because again, you're flying knock left out of your bow and it hits to the right. That could be one thing, and you'll see that also, because when you come down here, this is exaggerated, but your arrow will be sticking to the target like that. So if you're shooting an arrow that's spined way too weak for your bow, you're gonna see probably an impact that's pretty far off. Something like that. But if you're shooting a fletched arrow, you might not see that. So that's where the shooting slow-mo on your camera, that's what's gonna point that stuff out to you. Now, something that it's more likely gonna be that you're actually gonna see on the target for, again, a right-handed shooter, if you impact right, that it was a collapse. Specifically, if you hit low right, it was probably a collapse. And what that means is that whenever you got ready to release that arrow, your bow hand went like this. You collapsed, which just means that you were trying to grab something, someone threw something at you and you're trying to grab it. Or in this situation, because it's shot anticipation, that was your brain trying to brace for the shot. You winced, and you hesitated and you shrunk yourself in, or collapsed on the shot. That's what it was. Because as you collapse, that means you're bringing the bow that direction. Or if I'm aiming at the target, you're bringing the bow that direction. That's where I say a lot of times a collapse is a low right, because you're collapsing like this. But in general, I tend to notice that it's period. For me, because I take the time, excuse me, to tune my arrows correctly, right impacts like that are almost always either I just wasn't holding the arrow in the right spot at the time that I released the arrow, the tip of the arrow that is, or it's a collapse. Moving low. Low impact. Again, where you're holding the tip of the arrow, you're going to see that as a trend on every impact. That's just where you were holding. You were holding too low. A low impact could mean a collapse. It could mean that you dropped your bow arm, and a combination of maybe of a right-handed shooter, you were already holding a little bit left and then you dropped your bow arm. So even though you released right here, it hits right here and it's straight in line. Something to still think about, but more than likely, you might have dropped your bow arm, but low impacts for me seem to mean nothing more than you need to hold higher. Nothing usually more than that. We're not going to get into environmentals, like if there was wind drag and stuff like that. We're not going to get into all that. Although, if it's a hard enough, wind's blowing hard enough, I guess that could mean, like, and you're shooting into the wind, that could put some excess drag or lift, or, depending on which direction the wind's going, from behind you or in front of you, drag or lift on your arrow. But the most effect, I'm telling you guys, especially for us that are taking shots inside 20 yards, the most effect that you're going to see as a wind on this arrow is that you're still probably going to hit pretty darn close to the spot, but it's going to be like this based on how the wind's blowing your arrows. So never try to tune your arrows outside on a windy day, because it ain't going to be right, I can promise you. Even if it's a bear shaft, if there's much of a wind, that's going to affect the flight of your arrow. So low hit, to me, as far as you guys are concerned, I wouldn't take that as anything more than you need, as long as you're following through. Follow through, again, I can't stress enough, it's so important to all this, because if you're not following through and you're doing different stuff every time that you release that arrow and you're not being consistent with your form, none of this means anything to you. But if you're following through and you're being consistent on your form, and paying attention to a lot of other stuff that I've already talked about in videos, this diagnosis system can help you. But that low impact, just aim a little bit higher if you're an aimer, or even if you're an instinctive shooter, just lift your arm up a little bit, work on that sight picture, move back in a little bit closer to dial in that instinctive aim, and slowly work back until that sight picture fixes itself. So we've covered all those three. Now let's move to the last one, which is a left impact. Knock right arrow travel, generally for a right-hand shooter, generally means stiff. And the way that you know that is the arrow was weak. It's weak enough that it flexes around the bow and goes to straighten itself back out, but it's so stiff it doesn't have enough flex to straighten itself back out after it wraps around that arrow and does all this wacky stuff flying down range. But by the time it wraps around that bow and goes to straighten itself back out, it's too stiff. It can't straighten itself back out, so it wraps around the bow and can't straighten itself back out because of how stiff that it is, and it flies down range, knock right for a right-handed shooter. So I talked to you about how drastic you're probably going to see that. It's probably going to be, if it's super stiff arrow, it's going to look something like that. Now, if you're anywhere in the ballpark on your spine, arrow length, point weight, you're probably not going to see it with a fletched arrow super predominantly. I mean, you will, you know, it might look like that. It might be pointed, that knock might be pointing. You might have hit pretty darn close, but that knock is pointing and there's no wind, just a little bit to the right like that. Like, it's actually how this bow is shooting currently. It's shooting just a little bit stiff. That's what it's going to look like. That knock is going to be to the right. So you can knock tune as a diagnosis or whatever, but that's more so for arrow tuning, which we've already covered that in another video, and I'll go over that more extensively in the future. But if you're hitting way over like this and that arrow looks like that, your arrows are way too stiff. So in that circumstance, you need to completely revisit your arrow build and tune, take some slow-mo video. But as far as a general diagnosis, if you just suddenly see yourself starting to trend right impacts and that arrow is pointed straight back at you, there's no wind, nothing, you're probably plucking. And a pluck means that whenever you went to release that arrow, you plucked the string out from your head. You literally, like a guitar string, went poing. And if you're plucking, look what that arrow does. You're pulling back and pluck, pulling that hand out away from the side of your head like that. And look at which direction that arrow is pointing. To the left. So if you plucked that arrow, instead of it going straight down, you went pluck, and it's going to come down and it's going to hit to the left because you've orientated your whole shot to the left whenever you pulled that string away from the side of your head. So to fix that, work on that release. Work on bringing that shot straight back. Give that tension somewhere to go instead of pulling the string outside your head. If you can't get some semblance of back tension figured out and giving that energy somewhere to go, and just letting that hand come straight back towards your shoulder, practice catching that golf ball off your shoulder, you know. Or if you can't do that, just work on a static release. Just let that string go. Don't pull. Keep your hand touching the side of your face at all times, no matter what. Don't do this and try to hurry up and get it back on your face. Something like that. Never leave your face with contact of your hand to your face if you can't get back tension down. That right there, it's called static release. For you is probably going to be the most consistent. if you can't, again, get that back tension down and work on giving that energy somewhere to go and letting that hand just drift straight backwards, which is the cleanest release possible. That is what will generally, as a right-handed shooter, cause that left impact, is that collapse. So you need to work on that release hand. And like I said, there's alibis to all this. All this could mean, again, is that maybe you're shooting too much weight, or you're, not stable, you're not steady, you're nervous, you're shaking, you have target panic, whatever. And it just meant that whenever you have the arrow down here, you were doing this number right here, and when you shot, you were right here. So it impacts to the left. That's all that could mean. So a lot of these problems, these inconsistencies and impact, is because you need to work on your form and you need to shoot a weight that you can manage. But as far as if you're doing all the rest of that correctly and you're seeing any of these impacts on the target, these will be a trend. If it's actually a problem, you won't just see, if you're doing this, then you're shooting way too much you're not consistent, you probably don't have good form, you're not doing the same thing every time, you're shooting too much bow weight if you're doing all this. If you're all over the place, if you can't hit a stop sign at 20 yards, you've got way bigger problems than anything I've already told you in this video. You need to work on form, consistency, follow through, drop bow weight. But if you're already doing pretty good on all that, these will be trends if they start becoming a problem. So for me, I'll start noticing a trend. I'm impacting, just a little bit to the left every single time. I'm plucking. I'm starting to get a pluck and I need to fix it. I need to put a higher emphasis on a clean release to fix that left impact and put it back in the middle. It'll be a trend. It'll be regular. It'll be one of those things, if I shoot off at all, I'm shooting to the left, which I would venture to say, this might be a stretch, that's going to be a lot of your all's problems if you're a right-handed shooter. Again, left-handed, this is opposite. Left-handed, this is a collapse. This is a pluck. But, if I'm collapsing a lot, I went through a stage where I was collapsing just a little bit. I could not stop hitting to the right. Couldn't stop hitting to the right. And a good way to fix some of those problems, and this is what I do, I bust out a piece of cardboard and I stick it to this bale backstop. And that piece of cardboard, I take a level out, bring a level out with a Sharpie, and I draw a nice bold black Sharpie mark that's exactly level, plumb true with the world. And I work on keeping the tip of my arrow on that level line and trying to impact on that level line. And that's a good way to diagnose those left-right impacts also. Practice until you can keep the tip of the arrow on that line and impact on that line. You know that at that point you've cleaned up your release, and you should be working on it all the time. Make a mental note, while I'm shooting at that line, because I'm plucking, I'm trying to work on my release. I'm trying to have a good follow through, good release, and back tension, static, whatever, until you're hitting back on that line again. Collapses, same thing. Tip the arrow on that line down below it and focus on follow through. Do not move that bow arm from where it was when the shot broke until the arrow hits, until you're hitting that line again. That is how you fix these things. Diagnosis is great, but if you don't actually address it, it does nothing for you. So that is how I diagnose what I'm doing with my shot off of what's happening on the target. Again, regularly. It's a trend. It might pop up and last for a little bit, but that's whenever you realize it's an issue and you need to address it immediately. So I hope this video helped you guys. And really, it might seem like a lot to digest, a lot to think about, but, write it on paper if you have to. Draw a target on paper and say, if I hit high, it's this, right this, low this, left this, and keep that on you whenever you go practice. And, reference it if you have to. Like, well, I'm hitting, what did it mean? What did he said whenever I hit right? Okay, it could mean one of these things. And again, it's not a fix-all. And again, I can't stress the form, the follow-through, the consistency. That's everything, because if you're all over the place, nothing I've said is going to help you because you're not being consistent in the first place. So it's not too late to be working on this stuff. My season starts here in just a couple weeks, and with these bows like this, we want to be getting the most amount of energy and efficiency out of these arrows, moving as slow as they are. You want to be hitting what you're aiming at and feel confident that you're going to hit what you're aiming at. It's not too late. It's never too late to get yourself to that point. So I hope this video was maybe the last little bit of help that you need before it's time to get out there and start chasing deer and elk and hitting the woods or mountains. So thanks for watching this video, guys. I appreciate it. I appreciate all your views and support. So be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell icon so you get notified whenever I post a new video. Get outside, shoot your bows, shoot straight, start getting that hunting gear in order, and I'll catch you guys next time.